Thank you for coming to this talk about Appium, which I'm calling now the language of automation. You'll understand that a bit better later in the talk, and sort of the direction Appium's headed and what's new. So for those of you wanting to hear a talk about mobile applications, this talk will contain no slides about mobile applications. This is about a much broader set of things than Appium is going to do going forward. But feel free to use Appium for your iOS and your Android automation. It's still a wonderful tool for that. But just a heads up, this is sort of an introduction to the future of what's coming with Appium. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan Cuellar. I have a Twitter handle, which I put beneath there. I'm the creator of Appium. I am the head of development at a company called Foodit in London. Previously, I managed all of QA for Shazam, which is that fun app on your phone that tells you what song's playing, and at a dating site called Zoosk. And even before then, I worked at Microsoft on Office for Mac and Office for Windows. And a long time ago, I went to school. So that's a quick bit about me. But I'm not here to talk about me. I'm here to talk about Appium. So show of hands, who in here has used Appium or at least knows what it is? Hopefully, all right, some people. I think it's all of you, but you're just being shy. Or hopefully it is. If you don't, I'll tell you briefly what it is later in the slides. But going in, assuming everyone knows what Appium is, the first thing I'm going to talk about today is Appium support for Mac OS X applications. So I put a link to the GitHub repo there, where you can check out the source code and download it and read the README and all that. But I'm going to show you more in depth of sort of how it works and what makes it up today. So just a quick bit about the capabilities of Appium for Mac. It's currently run separate from Appium. You can launch it from regular Appium if you have it installed already. But unlike some of the other drivers, it will not automatically install alongside Appium. The reason for that is because installing Appium for Mac requires very, very high level of permissions that we would have to prompt you several times for to get during the install. So because of that, currently we require you just to drop it in your applications folder on its own. And then once that's done, it will just work with Appium out of the box. If you're using 1.6.5 or higher, I want to say it might be 1.6.4 or higher. But it's the latest version, it definitely does work. It supports versions of Mac OS X ranging from 10.7, which I think is, can anyone name the cat that goes with that? I feel like it's Mountain Lion, maybe. I'm not sure which one that is. Or maybe it's just Lion. Maybe I think 10.7 is Lion. I'm going to go with Lion. Anything from there forward, it will work. But Mac OS X upgrades are free, so please upgrade. But I understand that many of you have customers that for one reason or another don't do that, and no worries. If they're using a 10-year-old version of Mac OS X, it is supported. It also supports detailed mouse actions. It supports the native DOM. And it doesn't currently do web views, but the support is possible to add. I won't go into the reasons why it's not included now, but there is room for someone to bring that in. So at a high level, this is sort of what it looks like. It looks like any other Selenium WebDriver protocol-based automation framework. There's a server. It controls everything. It takes the JSON wire HTTP requests, and then it translates those into the appropriate ones for the Mac platform. So there's a command handler for each command in the WebDriver framework. I'll show you a few of those in a bit. And then we either funnel it through the PF Assistive framework or through a Mac keyboard and mouse set of tools that a guy named Stuart Russell built for us. And then we reply back just like any other WebDriver compliant automation. So the neat part here is that it's all supported by Apple, basically, not willingly, but in the APIs we use are the ones that ship with OS X. So they're supported, they're not hacky, they're not going to go away. They're there to be used for purposes similar to this, and then I guess in thus our purpose as well. So the framework we use called PF Assistive, it's built by, I don't remember the name of his company, but it's a guy named Bill Cheeseman. And it's normally a pay framework, it's not free. But he does have a license for free applications of it, and we did some emails back and forth, and he's agreed to allow Appium a royalty-free license of his framework. We could do it without his framework, but that would add many, many months to the development cycle, or if not years. So being able to use it did save us a lot of time. What his framework does, PF Assistive, is that it takes the Mac OS X accessibility APIs that they provide for things like screen readers and assistive devices, and it puts a layer in between that makes it synchronous and makes it consistent across every version of Mac OS. The APIs, I believe, are by nature callback-based and asynchronous, which is a bit difficult to work with for imperative programming like test automation. But they also differ from Mac OS X versions. So in theory, if you were writing automation using this for Lion versus Snow Leopard versus Mavericks versus Yosemite, your automation would have to look different for each one of those. And the nice thing about this framework is it consolidates and unifies all of that to make it much easier to do. So I'll give you just a quick, I'll try a demo. We'll see if this works. So here's the tool that this is based on. It's a tool by a company called, what is the company name? I think it's Fiddlesoft. There we go, it's these guys. So the framework we use is the same one used by this tool, written by these people. And this is the pay tool we have here. As you see, I have a trial version that I downloaded last night. And you can look at the different applications on the Mac. So for example, here's PowerPoint. And actually, where's the thing where it will show me highlight? It'll show me what I've selected. So you can sort of see, it will highlight, and you can kind of walk the DOM tree. Actually, you can see right now I'm in the bottom bar of the application PowerPoint. And actually, what you'll see also is that it's designed to generate AppleScript. So if you've never used AppleScript before, it's a scripting language that ships with Mac OS X. And this tool, UI Browser, is designed to build AppleScript to automate the UI with AppleScript. There are definite drawbacks to that. I have had jobs where I wrote AppleScript automation, and it's very unreliable, and it's very difficult to work with because it's sort of a half-baked programming language. It's not a real programming language. But it does, all the applications are fully scriptable, and in this case, we wouldn't use the PowerPoint one per se as much as there's one called System Events, which has an AppleScript interface that you can talk to and automate any UI in the whole operating system, which is quite nice. So anyways, this is sort of the tool that we are using the same framework as, but instead of using it to generate AppleScript tests, we use it to write Selenium tests, which is a framework that many more people know how to write tests for. So let's go back to PowerPoint. All right. So imagine that box with the little Lego piece being the framework that drives that application I just showed you. So what can it do? I guess not what can it do, but what to automate it, you're familiar with the idea of a capabilities object in Selenium. On the web, it traditionally is the browser name. On Appium, it tends to be things like the Android APK path, the package name. On iOS, you have the iOS version number and the bundle identifier and the UDIT and things like that that normally show up in this object. For the Mac, you just need the platform, Mac. You can give an implicit timeout here, like you can with the web. We have a parameter called loop delay, which will set the polling interval for all of our polling loops. So one of the negative things about making an asynchronous framework synchronous is that then you have to poll. Not a problem for UI automation, as performance is generally not that huge a concern as long as it works reasonably fast. But that's there. We also allow you to set the mouse speed, where you want your diagnostics output. And I wish other, Selenium and other ones would include this, but we have the screenshot on error functionality baked into this as well. And it looks just like any other Appium test. We've repurposed get instead of on the browser. What it'll do is it'll take you to a URL. On Appium, it will switch Android activities, I believe. It doesn't do anything on iOS. But on Mac, it will let you open an application. So you can either just give the name of the application, like calculator, or you can give the path to it, or the bundle identifier. The method we use sorts it all out. So however you want to do it, that's how you launch an application. You can find elements using XPath, using accessibility IDs. This is an interesting case. I'll talk about it on the next slide. But XPath is actually the preferred mechanism for finding elements on Appium for Mac, and I'll go into why later. And clicking looks the same, getting the text looks the same, all the other stuff, it's all the same. So not that different from what you're used to moving forward. So some of the finer points. Absolute XPath is faster, much, much faster on this than regular XPath, where you would normally write an expression that's shorter and less brittle and finds things. In the Mac app, you want to write the opposite. You want to write the nasty XPath that you would get with a Selenium recorder. And it's because the performance is very poor for the XPath search right now on the Mac app. The reason for this is because of the way we hook into the accessibility framework. It has some inter-process communication that's quite slow. We have found, I won't go into, there's a way to fix this, but I can't talk about it. And we can't implement it out of the box for you guys, but come to me afterwards and I can point you to a guy that can tell you how to fix that. But I'm not allowed to talk to it about it. Or I'm just being cautious. But we will never be able to ship it with the app. We also have the ability to do automatic XPath generation, so it's not a full-blown record and playback WYSIWYG like Selenium IDE or something like that, but we do have a tool that will let you automatically get your XPath out of it, which is quite nice. And the other thing is, much like the Android version of Appium, it has operating system-wide scope, meaning the automation is not sandboxed into only the application you're working with, but it supports any application on the operating system that has a user interface. So basically everything, and I will show you a quick demo, and then I'll actually write a test with you guys in a second too, and you can see that it's just like Selenium. So this is kind of a tour de force in what can be done with Appium for Mac. And actually, I will show the video outside of PowerPoint so that it's full screen. It is this one. All right, that's full. How do you full screen this? All right, well, I'll just make it really big. Whatever. So you can see it's typing some text in TextEdit. It's going to drag with the mouse, move the text around. Weird thing you can do on the Mac. Just click and select to delete, type, and now it's going to save the file. So as you see, everything in the operating system is in scope here. The file dialogues, anything you want. The world is your oyster, as they say. So you can do whatever you like. And it's reasonably performant there. If you use the absolute XPath, which I know is a no-no for people who know how to write Selenium tests. But before we get back into the slides, I'll go through with you really quickly writing a test. So I have this fun example here. Let's go to desktop. All right, it's called, there we go. Maybe I misspelled that. I'll make this a bit bigger for you guys, maybe. Let's see. That's probably a bit better now. All right, so I've made a file called test.py, and you'll see it's just your standard Python Selenium test. You can see we start the WebDriver session here. We grab the calculator app. We override the cookies method since there's no idea of a cookie on the desktop app to tweak parameters in real time. We use action chains to click. When you use action chains in Appium for Mac, you're going to actually drive the mouse. If you use a direct click, you're going to send a click through the operating system instead of through the input. So the idea is that one will move the mouse and click it, the other will just send an on-click handler to the element. So we want to actually use the mouse here. So there's a little helper method we've written here that just finds the element and makes a quick action chain to click it. But this is also how you do things like drag and drop with action chains, much like you would in Selenium. So the rest of the test is left largely unimplemented, but I'll show you how quickly we can implement it. So what this test does is it just calculates something in the calculator app. So I'll open our calculator app here, and I'll actually need to launch Appium for Mac, which I'm launching from Xcode because, why am I launching it from Xcode? Because I made a tweak to it for something for this demo that isn't part of the actual thing. So there we go. We should see it running down there now. There it is. So we can get rid of Xcode. So you'll see here's Appium for Mac. It just sits there. It's running. But it has the ability, as I mentioned, to do automatic XPath detection, for lack of a better word. So let's set this test back to normal. So the first thing this test does is it clicks the all clear button on the calculator. So all you do on the Mac is you hold down the function key over the element you want XPath for. And you'll see the dock icon jump, which means we've found the XPath for it. And then we can put that right here. So you can see that is a long, brittle XPath expression for that element, but it does work. And the nice thing is on desktop, changing the UI doesn't happen quite as often as it does on the web. You can use relative XPath. It will just run a lot slower. In the case of the calculator app, it'll be fine because the DOM isn't very deep. So the complexity of the searches is quite manageable. But if you're using an app with a very rich DOM, something like Safari, and you're trying to automate it, you're going to have to use this because it will just be too slow otherwise. All right, so let me finish this test. So the next thing we need is the view menu. So it's quite simple. I find it. You see the dock icon bounce. I'll go put that in there. Then it wants the scientific button. Found that. There's scientific. It wants the pi key, which I think is there. Got that. Or did I not get that? Actually, I didn't get that. Let's do that again. So we need the pi key. There we go, jump that time. There's the pi key. We need the cubed button. There we go. We need the e to the x button. And the 10 to the x button. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll close the window, so that button. There we go. So as you can see, it's quite easy to get the XPath automatically. And now we can run this test. So if the server's already running, and let me set this back to its desired state. If I run the test we just wrote together, actually I'll kill the calculator altogether. And let's run this test. You'll see it launches the calculator. Because I used action change, it's moving the mouse. So it clicked all clear, it's setting it to scientific mode, it's going to hit the pi button, and then all the other buttons we talked about, and generate a not a number, and then close the window. It actually used to say infinity, and the script was called to infinity and beyond. It was kind of funny. But they've changed it to say it's a nan now. So cool, that's an example of a really easy Appium for Mac test that pretty much anyone here I could hope could write. If not, well, the slides will be online, and you can impress your friends. All right, so that was sort of one of the things I wanted to talk about today. Another thing I'll talk about in more brevity is that Windows apps actually support Appium now. You'll notice the very, very cold devil because hell has frozen over. I used to work at Microsoft, and you don't understand the surprise I felt when I found out that they had decided to write their own Appium server. And it's a good kind of surprise. You know, I mean, a little bit of bitterness in that I wasn't there for it, but a good surprise. And so if you want to check it out, they've posted most of the source code there. There are pieces of it which are not open source for security reasons, I think. But it does work, and you can look at a lot of the source there. Cool. So just to cover sort of the breadth of what they've done here, this is not a shoddy implementation. This is like a full-fledged thing that they're actually beginning to use across the company to automate all of their applications. So it does have some serious backing. And it supports anything that runs on Windows 10, basically. So your universal platform applications, Win32 apps, your Windows Presentation Foundation apps, WinForms. It does web views, mostly. There's an asterisk there. Won't go into it. Office plugins, Visual Basic apps, whatever you like. It all works with Appium now, thanks to the people at Microsoft. That didn't click over. There we go. It also supports single touch and multi-touch. I've been told mobile phone and Xbox are coming soon. Given that phones now run Windows, or I guess tablets run Windows 10, they're sort of already supported, but I think what they meant by that was some of the more phony aspects, well, I guess phone-like things that they do, as opposed to the Windows things they do. And cool, I will show you, they've put together a cool demo, and then I'll do one for you in a minute as well. So that one is probably the, I feel like that's in the demos folder. Yeah, it's this one, okay. So this is a tour de force in what Windows can do. It's actually more than what the Mac one does, which is pretty cool. So you'll see here, they're starting with the browser. They're showing off a Selenium conference website. And the dragging and support and things like that. That's a touch to drag gesture. Now you'll see the calculator. This is your standard Win32 app. There we go. It's starting to move now. They still haven't lifted the beta tag because they're working on the performance a bit, as you can see. But I've heard that they're pretty much there in the next version. Now they're going to automate Cortana with it, and they're going to look at some web content displayed inside a Windows app, which is really cool. That Seattle Mariners score is web content. And then they're actually going to then go back to the browser here. So you can get really, really rich scenarios out of this, which is really, really cool. And then lastly, I suppose, Notepad. Oh, no, there's one after this too. There's Notepad, a classic Windows app, a very old one that hasn't been updated in a while. And you can see here you have access to the whole operating system, the file dialogues, the desktop, the start menu, Cortana. It's all there. And if you want to look at the source code for these, the link I gave you earlier has a lot of these demos. And here's a Visual Basic app. They just wanted to laugh. So 1987 is when this was written, and you can automate it with Appium. So pretty cool. Oh, and then Paint. I forgot Paint. There's no pen demo in here. I don't have the pen demo, but they do have one where they're using the Inkwell thing, which is pretty, or whatever Microsoft calls it. But you can see this is a classic app many of you have played around with in your boredom, on your computers at school probably. Appium can do it too now when it's bored. So anyways, really, really cool and very, very comprehensive levels of support from them, which is nice to see. And then I have one more demo I'll do. So I have to VM up for this because I'm on a Mac, which I don't do very often since it's not in my dock, but there we go. I actually left the VM in a nice state where the demo was already running. So it should be set up correctly, I think, as soon as VMware launches it. So I guess while we're waiting for this then, well, the demo I'm about to show you is of multi-touch support. So you're going to see pinch to zoom, and you're going to see swipe to move around the page, to scroll, I guess, and then I believe, was it the claw to close the app? You're going to see that one too, I believe. I don't know what that gesture is called. So let's see, is the server running? Yeah, it looks like it's still good. Well, hopefully this works after I resume it. So let's run the multi-touch test. So it should start by opening a browser. It's going to go to a website, which hopefully the Wi-Fi here will load quickly enough for this test to work. If not, I'll have to go load it, keep it in the cache. It didn't load quick enough. But you could, if you were paying close attention, you could see the zooming. I will fix that problem by loading the website myself so that it's in the cache. And so that next time it tries to load it, come on. Yeah, conference Wi-Fi, there's $1 million business if someone can figure that out. I do this very often, and this is actually above average, so don't feel bad about this. All right, anyways, now we've loaded the website. So here we go. Let's try this again. All right, browser window. That should be in the cache. Yeah, look at that. That should load pretty quickly, maybe. But if not, watch. Oh, there you go. There's the zoom. And then you're going to see it. Oh, maybe the shut didn't. Oh, there we go. Close the tab with the gesture. So pretty neat. Anyway, and if you want to look at the source code for this, I can bring it up real quick. You can see that it's just Appium code. It's just Selenium code. It's what you already know. So learn nothing, and you can still do a lot. You can see here their capabilities. They have a device name. They have an app. So in this case, they're launching Edge. And that's it. And then from there on, it's just find element, element.click, all the things you know and love. Good. So that's sort of the more technical demo-y part of my talk. Now I'm going to get a bit more philosophical with you guys. So bear with me. And then there should still be plenty of time for questions. So what I really wanted to talk about today was sort of the evolution of Appium. And so the reason why I showed those things earlier was that they're sort of the last step in the evolution, or the previous step, I should say, in the evolution. But I want to talk about sort of where everything's going. So it all started with Selenium back in 2004. There's a man named Jason Huggins who, at some point or another, has probably come to Russia and talked to you guys. He created a tool called Selenium. And it used JavaScript to drive websites, and people thought it was pretty cool. One guy named Simon Stewart thought it could be done better, and he created this thing called WebDriver and the WebDriver protocol and all of that, which is now used by other things. But at the time, it really improved the way people were writing their Selenium tests. And then I suppose I came along about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, or whatever it's been at this point, and Appium started, which was like, why can't we take the WebDriver protocol and use it for iOS and Android apps, which I haven't talked about today intentionally. And people started to use that, and they started to like it. And then the Appium project, and Jason Huggins again, he always knows what's next. He put out this idea of Star Driver being, well, it wasn't that hard to take WebDriver and make it work for mobile apps. So what's going to be so hard about taking it and making it work for everything? So the first step in that is desktop apps, and the people at Microsoft jumped on board with WinApp Driver. Appium for Mac was a project that I started, which was then enhanced by a man named Stuart Russell, who works at a company that does, I don't actually know what product Stuart works on, but the company is largely famous for doing tax software in the US, so you probably haven't heard of them. But they're a very big, famous company. They do all of the accounting and tax stuff in the US. But I don't think that's what he works on. But they started using it for all of their apps there. And about a year ago, he sent me an email and he said, I'd like to contribute back all of my improvements to Appium for Mac. And I said, I'd be more than happy to have you do that. And so he's done that. But this is the past, and I want to talk about the future. And so the future is this idea called Star Driver. So WebDriver is a bad name because WebDriver currently controls Windows apps and Mac apps, and Android apps and iOS apps and websites. So it's not really a WebDriver, is it? It's sort of like Star being like wildcard, right? It drives whatever you want it to drive. It's the driver. So why can't we have one protocol to automate everything? And to do that, all we need to do is continue trying to cram the WebDriver spec into things, really. So in a minute I'll get to sort of, I think that maybe a new spec is required that will be WebDriver-like. But I'm going to talk about how we've tweaked WebDriver to make it work with all these things and what we've learned from that. And then ideally, in a perfect world, people like me don't do anything. We just go to conferences and talk to you guys. And there are people that actually make the phones and the tablets and the watches and the Xboxes that do all this work. So it'll be much like if you use a browser now, you don't have to make the HTML implementation for it. It kind of comes with the browser, right? They all have this standard HTML that they all use. Or if you want to plug something into a wall, there's a socket, it's a standard. It's going to be plug and play just like that for automation in the future, I hope. So what we're talking about is abstract UI automation. If you think about it for a second, I mean, what does automation do? You have inputs to a system, you have outputs from a system, and you manipulate those inputs and then verify the outputs. In the case of a website, your inputs are the mouse, to click things, the keyboard to type things, And then your output is a big display, which includes screenshots, and you can read the DOM and the HTML and the properties on it. I guess an additional input on the website would be JavaScript, as you can execute arbitrary script with Selenium as well. But then you then verify those outputs. So you're clicking things, you're sending keys, you're running scripts, and then you're poking and probing and inspecting your DOM to verify things. On Appium, how does it work? It's the same thing. Instead of a mouse, you have a finger. Perhaps you have a microphone, a camera, a thumbprint reader. These are all your inputs. And then your outputs is largely you've got your speakers, you've got your force feedback, you've got your, or what they call it, taptic button, you've got your display. That's about it, right? And so it's the same idea. You take these inputs and you manipulate things, and then you verify them. So why not Xbox? You have a controller. It sends inputs, and then you have a screen. It displays things. It has a DOM. Why couldn't you use that protocol to then do that? Or the watch. You have two inputs on the watch, on the Apple Watch at least. You have the, I forget what they call it, the crown, the thing that you rotate, and then you have the touch screen. And then as far as outputs, you have the haptic feedback that you can get on your wrist, and then you have the screen, of course. So this protocol should work for all of these things, I guess is what I'm getting at. And when you make a nice abstraction like that, it just works. So that's what WebDriver is. Whenever you automate WebDriver, it doesn't even know what language you're talking to it with, because it just understands HTTP. So whether you're writing tests in Python or you're writing them in C#, to the server, it's all just a big blob of JSON that it gets over the internet interface. So this is quite useful. And for those of you who may not be following me on this, I'll give you a quick demo. So I'm going to launch up a Selenium server, and you'll see, as you may know, and I can use a browser for this, it just runs on localhost port 44s, and then if you go to there, you'll see, here's the thing. So if I want to, let's make a session real quick. I'll make one with Chrome. And you'll see Chrome should show up in a second. There it is. And it has a session ID. So let's talk to it, right? So what can we talk to it? So it's just localhost port 444/wd/hub/session for this session. And then I could ask it, what is your page source? And you can see there, it doesn't really have much. Let me actually put something more interesting in here. So this should be a better page source. So here's the page source. Oh, is it? Wait, there we go. You can see it doesn't know where this is coming from if it's Python. I'm doing it from a browser, but I could equally do it from anything else. So if I take this URL, and I have a GUI-based HTTP thing. So let's do something different. Let's send it a post request, and we'll send it, let's change the URL of this, and I'll move it over here so that it stays in view. Let's change the URL. So I believe that's called URL. And the body just needs to be a JSON blob with one key called URL. And a key for where it should go to. Let's send it to, anyone have a favorite website? Heisenbug.ru, maybe? I don't know. This is not going to load very quickly on the Wi-Fi. So as you can see, this is a common interface. And so there, I've controlled it remotely, right? This is what Selenium is. It does not have any, it is actually written in Java, but like, it doesn't matter what you talk to it with. And this is the future of StarDriver. It can be written in whatever language it needs to be written in, and then you just talk to it over HTTP. So there you go, there's kind of the idea. And then just for the sake of doing something a little different, you can see there's many different endpoints. So that's page source. If I want to have the page title, you can see very tiny print, there's the page title, etc. And just to sort of show you, these same things work if I use Appium to control a mobile app. So let's take Appium here. Where's Appium? There we go, it's loading up. So I'm going to start an iOS app, and sometimes this takes a second. So I've saved my capability sets here. Just takes a minute for the iOS simulator to boot. But what I'm going to show you is that that same protocol, being those same kinds of HTTP requests, work with Appium, and you don't change anything. And because we've molded it around the WebDriver protocol, it still makes sense. So as soon as this app loads over here, and actually I can go ahead and grab the command while I'm here, maybe. There we go. There we go, there it is. So now I'll show you the same exact thing here. So in my browser, Appium is running on a slightly different port, but beyond that, it's localhost 4723. But then after that, I will get the page source, and you'll see same exact command, talk to a different server, but now it's getting the page source for a mobile app. And this is the same way WinAppDriver works, the same way Appium for Mac works. You send the same commands, you get the same kinds of responses. So before I run out of time, let me get back to my slides. So where's PowerPoint? There it is. Okay. So you can see that's how it works. It's just HTTP. And the idea of StarDriver is that you just put a server in the middle, and you talk protocol, and it talks back to you. And then however it needs to manipulate whatever it's responsible for, it does. And so why should we do this? Every time you want to automate something different, you shouldn't have to learn a new technology. Isn't it annoying that when mobile came out, you had to learn how to use Espresso, or you had to learn how to use UI automation, or something like that? Why do you need to learn something? Automate, like, to test it, you didn't need to really learn anything new, did you? You still know how to, move your fingers around and go to websites, and you had to learn a little bit, but not really, right? So why should you need to learn a new stack every time you want to automate something? It's generalizable across many platforms. This is, I think, a learning from Appium. When we started, we didn't know that it was, but now we know that, well, basically, it's kind of the same thing as I talked about earlier. And just the amount of minimal effort it took in regards to changing the WebDriver spec to support Appium is just further evidence that this problem is generalizable and abstractable across all these things. The other thing is that in the future, end-to-end scenarios will cross over between multiple devices. If you think about, I work at a company that does online food ordering. All of our end-to-end scenarios realistically involve at least 2 devices, more than likely 3. If you think about it, a customer usually orders on a website. A restaurant then gets a notification on an iPad in their kitchen that they need to make some food, and they confirm it. And then a driver gets a text saying he needs to deliver the food on his phone. So if you think about it, there's a website, there's an iPad in the kitchen, and there's a phone, just in this scenario. How would you automate that today? It would require something very complicated because the website wants to talk Selenium. The phone you can talk to with Appium and the tablet as well. So Appium has made that scenario work, but you throw in something new, like an Xbox, and all of a sudden, how do you automate it, right? And that's what we are seeking to solve. You should just be able to automate in whatever language you like, whatever you want. So I talked about food delivery. So I meant to go through those as I was doing it. But I think you get the idea. So I think the best analogy I've come up with is that it's a lot like composing music. So when Tchaikovsky, or take your favorite Russian composer, when he wrote one of his famous pieces, he doesn't know how to play an oboe, I don't think, right? And a bassoon, and a violin, and a timpani. He doesn't know. But he has a protocol by which he communicates with the people who do know how to control those things. And it's musical notation. And the nice thing is, like, you can not have to learn how to play all of these instruments and still control people to use them, right? And this is the future of Appium. Appium is going to be this notation by which you, as the automator, compose symphonies of automation that involve not just a phone, not just a browser, but everything. And so I'll just play a fun video. This is an old video I have of basically that. So this is Jonathan Lips, who's the lead architect on the Appium project. He has written a script that has 5
the,
phones, each playing an instrument. And so he's automating drum hits with Appium, and he's automating keyboard presses and things like that, so you'll see. But this is the idea. This is like a 4-year-old video, but this is the idea of Appium. This is one script controlling 5 things with one protocol. If you add another instrument to the band, you as a composer don't need to learn anything new. So anyways, I won't torture you with more of this, but that's exactly the idea I'm talking about. So looking forward, what works with the WebDriver protocol? Capabilities are a great thing that they still work because it's just saying, what do I want to automate? You send a request with desired capabilities. I need a phone running Android 7 that has this app installed, and it gives you that. So that really works going forward with the idea of automating everything. So desirable, and then you get back saying, well, you just asked for a phone running Windows 7 or Windows Phone 7. I gave you back a Nokia whatever, you know, and so that's where the actual capabilities come in. I think this is still a useful paradigm going forward. The idea of status and sessions, so whenever you call status on the server, it says I'm up, I'm down. Sessions are the idea that if you have multiple things being automated at once, each gets its own session. I think that still applies in a world. You may have 2 scenarios going at once, or something like that. And things like page source, they still work because everything has some level of DOM. Though here, if you have multiple displays, does that get reflected in the page source, you know, as sort of 2 nodes, or are those 2 separate sources or something like that? Maybe not. User interface still works. All UI has elements, and you have ways to find them. And the protocol is generic enough that if you find it by black magic or you find it by the automation ID or CSS selector, whatever you want to do, it supports that. For Appium, we added the idea of having Android, what is it called? UI automator expressions. We added the idea of having UI automation expressions for iOS. We added other kinds of locators to the protocol without modifying it. It also has the idea of input method engines. So the idea of multiple inputs is kind of already in the protocol. But there are also things that don't really work. So there's this idea of separation of context. So in Selenium, you have windows and frames. So window is multiple tabs or windows in a browser, and then frames are iframes or frames if you have a really old site in Pages. In Appium, we have contexts. So I think going forward, this is the kind of thing we'll need to come up with a good way of abstracting and generalizing so that it makes sense. So I guess the question is really like, what causes a separation and why should you separate it out and how should you navigate and switch between them? The commands to interact don't really, they're not consistent. So like Android has back and Selenium has back, but iOS doesn't really have back. You can swipe left in some applications and that'll go back. But in general, that doesn't work there. Click doesn't really work on mobile because it's more like tap. And on Xbox, click doesn't make any sense, right? So there needs to be some work done to figure out like, how can we generalize these interactions in a way that makes sense for everyone? And the idea of alerts too, you have alerts on most things, but you can imagine on Xbox, I don't believe there's an idea of a modal alert. And then metadata is the other thing. So we have things like URL. There's not really a URL on a mobile app or on Xbox or on the watch, things like that. They don't make sense. Or a page title. So those are very web-specific constructs that are built in. Same thing with cookies and local storage and session storage. So what sort of general umbrella can you put those things under to make it work for everyone? So as I mentioned, I think it kind of breaks down like this. You have input devices, and maybe ones that are relative to certain output devices, like a touch screen or a mouse. And then ones that aren't, like a microphone or a keyboard or a joystick, where it doesn't really care what the output is. And then you have output devices, and then you have interactions. So perhaps input devices support different interactions, or output devices, maybe they support interactions. It's the kind of thing we're going to need to work on and figure out, but I definitely think it's a solvable problem. So in the future, end-to-end tests will require multiple platforms, and they will do it, as you've seen with the band. And if you want to try a web/iOS/Android scenario, that currently works with Appium. There will be one protocol to do everything, much like there's one protocol on the web to display a page, that being HTML, or there's HTTP to send data from point to point, or TCP, or all the protocols you can think of. There's going to be one for automation. And hopefully, device vendors will be the ones implementing it. So it'll work really, really well, and it'll be supported out of the box. And the software will be bug-free, of course. Yeah, you're supposed to laugh at that. So that's what I feel the future looks like. And so that's what I came to here to talk about today. So hopefully you've enjoyed a little bit about Windows apps and Mac apps, and hopefully not too soon I can see all of you doing cross-platform automation. So thank you very much for inviting me, and have a good conference.
Couple of minutes for questions. Yes?
Okay, I have a complicated question. First, when you test Mac or Windows application, did you use mouse or keyboard drivers?
Drivers, you said.
Drivers. Okay, if mouse click on some places or buttons in application, is there any competition between my work with this mouse and between tests?
Oh, so if you tried to move the mouse, would it affect the test? Is that kind of the question you're asking?
Yeah.
Yes, but in the case of the Mac one, it just tries to move towards the point, so if you then deviate it, it'll start going back until it finally reaches it. So eventually, it'll get really annoying because you'll be trying to click something and it'll move it back.
Okay, and the second part, if I lock my computer or send it in sleep mode, what then?
Sure.
I want to write test, set up and go home and lock my computer for security reasons.
Yes, so the way we've implemented it for Windows and Mac, it is identical to a person using it, so any obstacle that may prevent you, such as a lock screen, it will also struggle with. So when you lock the screen, there's no UI to click. Like if you click the mouse on the lock screen, nothing happens. So yes, but I would say on the plus side, there's no difference between what the computer's doing and what a user's doing. So unlike with Selenium, where you can basically minimize the window and it'll go do stuff, which isn't a realistic scenario, no user's ever going to use the app like that. In this case, we've done it at the operating system level so that if it's not displayed in the operating system, you can't manipulate it. So you're not going to have those things, well, the Selenium test worked, but in reality, no one can click it because it's such a tiny box on a tiny screen, or there's things in the way or something like that. So yes, to answer your question, it's just like you using it. So anything that'll stop you will stop it.
Answer question?
Hi, Dan. Thank you for your speech and especially live demos. Can you say, what about synchronization? When you, for example, click in the button, as I see, and then you need to wait, program busy. You need to wait when it's finished work and then get a result. As I see, you use time delay. It's fixed, hard-coded.
Oh, the scripted uses sleep, but you could code a wait loop.
Huh?
It was just laziness on my part. You could put a wait loop there.
And what is based for? It's how it understands when you can run next command.
So I'm trying to think that test with the sleep was the calculator one, right?
Uh-huh.
So what you would really do is you would poll the display for the answer, and you would just wait for the answer to change or be different or be what you expect, much like you would with a normal test. Just for the purpose of the demo, I was being lazy and I just put a sleep there. But I'm not a proponent of sleeping. Don't sleep. Never sleep.
So like other WebDriver tests, you just wait for some elements or some inputs on the screen, right?
Yeah, just like a normal WebDriver test.
Yeah, thank you.